repairing on my interfacing. So I think it'll be in my best interest to tailor tack these markings as well. Cut out the fabric. Now I'm going to make my slits where I previously marked. So here is the center back. Here is the center front. Over here is the fold line. Slits here for the center front. And the last one here for the fold line. Okay. Now that we've done that, we're going to now proceed to tailor tack some of these markings on the waistbands, so that when it's time to fuse the interfacing to the fabric, I'll still have the important markings I need for my construction. And now I'm going to take one of my already fading construction marks, and instead of going this way on top, I'm going to go under instead, because it'll be much easier to pull out this thread if it's on the right side. So here's our first tailor tack on the waistband. So now I'm just going to keep doing this on all the other markings on this waistband here. Alright, so I've just finished tailor tacking my waistband pattern piece. As you can see here, I used my bright color orange thread to make some simple stitches indicating various construction markings that I will need to know for later. So this time I instead went under and have my knots visible on this side rather than on the interfacing side. Okay, so we are about to start constructing our McCall wrap skirt, and I decided to skip a couple of steps here and start with the waistband. Usually when you buy interfacing, it comes with some paper that has instructions telling you how to fuse your interfacing to your fabric. So here are the English instructions. So we're going to follow these instructions as we prepare our wrap skirt waistband for construction. So according to the directions, we're going to trim off the edge of our interfacing about 3/4 of an inch. So all that will be left will be about a 1/4 inch seam allowance on our interfacing. So let's try and see if we can do a close-up here. So you're going to go all around the interfacing edge and measure 3/8 of an inch from the edge of your interfacing. You're just going to use your disappearing ink marker to do so. And you're pretty much going to be doing this all around the waistband pattern. So far right here I have a couple of dash lines showing me that it's 3/8 of an inch away from the edge, and this is the amount I will need to trim off the interfacing. So just the interfacing we're trimming, not the fabric of our waistband, just the interfacing. So you're pretty much going to do this all around your waistband pattern piece. I've now finished marking 3/8 of an inch from the interfacing edge. So now that I've done that, I'm going to now take my scissors and trim just the interfacing, 3/8 of an inch. Here's the example of what I'll be doing all around the waistband. I'm just going to cut right up to the dash line that I made with my 3/8 inch seam gauge measurement, and then I'll take my scissors and just slash right through it along the dash lines and clear out that extra interfacing edge. All done. Took some time, but I was able to trim off the edge of my interfacing, 3/8 of an inch as specified in the instructions. And this is so that we don't have a lot of bulk in our seam allowance when we sew the waistband to the skirt. I'm gonna now take it over to my ironing board, and I'm going to fuse the interfacing to the fabric. Alright, I'm now at my ironing board, ready to fuse the interfacing to my waistband fabric. Now, according to the instructions, you're going to take your iron first, and you're going to just go along the edges here very quickly and lightly in order to put the interfacing in place, just so enough time for you to take out your pins. Alright, now that I've finished, I'm going to pull out my pins now. Okay, so my interfacing is in place thanks to ironing the edges. Next I'm going to do is I'm going to take this large piece of muslin fabric that I have soaked in water previously, and I'm going to lay it on top of my waistband pattern piece, making sure that my damp cloth is covering the entire thing. Okay. Now that I've done that, I'm going to take my iron and I'm just going to press down on top of my cloth and my waistband, and I'm going to leave it there for about 10 seconds. You don't want to leave it on for too long because everything's going to start steaming and you're going to start cooking your fabric essentially. So you only need to leave your iron on the surface for 10 seconds. And once that's over, you lift it up and then you move down the line and keep your iron pressed there for 10 seconds each time until you cover the entire waistband. And this is how you essentially fuse your fusible interfacing to your fabric. Got my interfacing nicely fused to my fabric. So here's the result. As you can also see, the markings I made with my disappearing ink have officially disappeared. So good thing I took the time and effort to make tailor tacks in my waistband pattern piece beforehand. So I'll still be able to construct this properly when the time comes. Alright, so now that we have prepared our waistband for the skirt, we can finally start going through the steps. So the first step, technically, is we're going to take our pockets and we're going to turn in 5/8 of an inch hem on the upper side edge of the pocket. So that would be this part here. So because we want to be able to remove our tailor tacks as easily as possible, we're going to make the side of the knots and the thread tail the right side of our fabric. So because of that decision, I'm going to turn it over to this side right here, which is now my wrong side. And I'm going to measure 5/8 of an inch on my seam gauge So I'll need to turn this curved edge here on my pocket 5/8 of an inch. And then once I do that, I'm going to take it over to my ironing board and I'm going to press it in place. Alright, so this is what your pocket is going to look like once you fold it over 5/8 of an inch along the curve of your pocket. So I'm just going to do the same thing to the other pocket. Right now it's on the right side. We want to be on the wrong side, so we're going to turn that over. We're going to pretty much do the same thing here. I got my pockets with the curved side folded over onto the wrong side of my pockets, 5/8 of an inch, and I pin it in place. So now I'm going to take this over to my iron and press it so the fold stays put. Alright, I got my pockets pressed, and now I'm going to carefully remove the pins. Now I'm going to turn the raw edge underneath. And pin that in place. This is what you essentially have to do with your curved edge on your pockets. Got it nicely folded and pinned, and we're going to take this to our sewing machine and do a simple stitch, keeping our hem in place, and then we're going to do an extra pressing to really flatten it out. Alright, machine, cut from the machine, make sure the thread tail is nice and long for the next stitch. Alright, so here in a nutshell is my hem on the curve of my pocket. So I'm going to do the exact same thing with the other pocket, and then I'm going to do an extra pressing to make sure everything is flat. So the next step is step number 12, and we're going to turn the edges along the bottom and sides of our pockets, about 5/8 of an inch seam allowance. And we're going to press those folds in place. So let's take care of the other pocket like this, without touching the corners, but just folding them up like this, and then we'll come up with a solution along the way. Deal. So I decided to pink the edges of the fold on my pocket so that it won't fray as much on the inside. So just to recap, I pinked all the raw edges on my pockets except the top. We leave the top alone. That stays the same. And once we pink the edges, we folded 5/8 of an inch, and we fold our corners along the short end away from each other. Then we got this other corner over here where we folded the corners together and then we smushed them down into a square before we pin that in place. So now I'm going to take these to the iron, press the folds down, and we'll move on to the next step. Alright, I'm at my ironing board and I'm going to press down on my newly formed folded edges along my pocket. Okay. Alright, now my folds are nicely flat. I'm going to take them back over to the table and start the next step. Alright, so we got one of our skirt front pieces here with the right side of the fabric showing up, which I can tell due to the thread tail and knots on my tailor tacks. So once we've pressed our edges of the pocket inward, we're going to pin our pockets to the front of our skirt piece here, matching notches and small circles, having the raw edges up top and on the side as even as we can get it. Thanks to my efforts previously, I have a slit here, and then I have a slit here on the side, indicating where to place my pocket. I also have my tailor tacks to help with the placement. If we're gonna have to make adjustments to where our pocket is gonna be, then we'll have to do that, because sometimes these things happen where things don't line up exactly as the way you want them to. So I think this is as good as it's gonna get for me personally. So I'm just going to pin my pockets where they are now. Okay, so let's now pin these edges together. Okay. I think I got my pocket where I need it to be. It's not a perfect solution, but at the very least, I had this folded edge here that I could maneuver and place along the side of my skirt. So, if you're having this problem, you can just do what I did here and open up the edge of this folded side of the pocket in order to have it match up on the side. So now that I've done that, I'm gonna now remove these other tailor tacks. Okay, so now I got my patch pocket pinned where I want it, for better or for worse. And I'm gonna take it to the machine, and according to step number 13 on the instructions, we're going to stitch the side and bottom to the skirt, and we're also going to do a base stitch along the top and the side of our pockets so that they stay tacked on to the top and the edge of our skirt front pattern piece. Alright, I got my front skirt piece at my machine with the patch pocket in place. I'm just going to do a basic straight stitch along the side and bottom of my pocket. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to do a simple base stitch on the machine along the top right here and along the sides of the skirt and pocket here, so that the pocket will stay in place at the top and on the sides while I construct the rest of the skirt. Take our project out from under the machine and snip it out. Okay, so here we have our patch pocket sewn in, as you can see a little bit here. So now that it's sewn onto the skirt, we're now going to machine base stitch the top and the sides so that they'll stay put during our skirt construction. All right, so now I got my base stitch in right here along the side. My little somewhat imperfect solution, but it'll hold, and I think it will work in the long run. But we'll make it work in the long run. So now I'm going to do the same thing with the other front skirt piece and patch pocket. And once we do that, we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so now we've come to the part where we attach the front skirt pieces to the back skirt piece. So that would be step number 14 right here. And it's pretty self-explanatory. We place the back skirt, which is right here. This is our back skirt piece, and we lay one of our front skirt pieces on top of the back skirt piece with right sides together. Straighten that out, and then we pin it in place. Simple as that. Now if you find yourself with your hems on your front and back skirt pieces not lining up evenly, don't worry about it. Just focus on making sure that your top skirt edge is even on the front and back of your skirt. That's where it needs to be even. If it's uneven along the hem, then it's always, we're going to be trimming and hemming that part of the skirt anyway, so we can always trim off any excess fabric to even up those hems. So that's never an issue. Alright, so I got my sides pinned, my front and back side pinned together, and I'm now going to take it to my machine and do a simple straight stitch with it. Okay, I'm at my sewing machine and I'm ready to sew the front and back skirts together along the sides. So I've already set up my machine at a straight stitch with a 2.5 length, 0 width, and my tension is right in the middle. So I'm just going to line up my edge next to the edge of my 5/8 inch seam allowance tape marker. And I'm going to take my time and carefully sew my stitch. Ta-da! We finished it. Alright, so we now got one of our front skirt pieces sewn to the back. Right here. So at this point we can remove one of our basting stitches that we previously sewn in there to keep the pocket from gumming askew now that we've sewn our side stitch. Alright, so we've stitched the side of our skirt with the back sewed to one of the front skirt pieces. So this is what it looks like joined together. And here we got our pocket, our patch pocket. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to trim our seam allowance so that our raw edges will be nicely pinked and reduce the amount of fraying from this particular fabric. Now we got our edges nicely pinked. now we'll have a layer of protection for this garment to prevent it from fraying in an out of control manner. So I'm now going to do the exact same thing with the other front skirt piece. So I've now sewn both of my front skirt pieces to my back skirt piece. To demonstrate, here is the right side of my skirt. We have the back right here, and along the sides here we have the front skirt pieces with the patch pocket sewn in place. Move over here too. So now we're going to create the facing on the front. In our instructions over here we have a little section of information documenting the several methods we could use to finish our raw edges along our fold-in facing. So for this particular step, I think I'm going to choose number 3, whereas we're going to stitch 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge and then use that stitch to turn along that edge inward and then stitch that in place close to the fold. So I think that should just look a little bit better than leaving the edge wholly pink like we did with the other seams. So for this particular exercise, I'm going to just go ahead and mark 1/4 of an inch from the raw edge right now so you can see how this works. Alright, so now that I got my 1/4 inch marked along the raw edge, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and sew it, the seam for you. So now I'm going to do a basic stitch 1/4 of an inch away from the raw edge along the side of my front skirt piece. I'm only using this stitch to help us turn over and hem it. We're going to use a machine-based stitch instead. So I'm going to just increase the length to 5, loosen the tension, put my needle down in the sewing machine, and I'm just going to do a straight through basic stitch along the 1/4 inch line. Okay. Alright. Cut that out. Now we're going to go over to the ironing board, turn over this edge, and we're going to press it down and then go back and hem it in place. Alright, I'm at my ironing board and I'm about to turn over my 1/4 inch seam that I just made. And I'm going to press that in place. here in a nutshell is our new cleaned up edge. Now once we've pressed this edge down, we're going to take it back to the sewing machine and we're going to stitch it officially in place. So on a side note, I took the liberty of ironing open my seams along the sides that I had previously made as well. So I just took my iron and I pressed the seams open, the seam allowances, and this way it'll make it easier for when I sew in the waistband and hem the skirt later by making these flat. So when you have the time, after turning over your 1/4 inch stitch, just press open your side seams as well. Alright, back at the sewing machine. I took the liberty of changing my stitch from the machine base stitching that I used previously. I decreased the length to 2.5. The width is still at 0, and my tension is now in the middle. Alright, now I've reached the end. I'm going to do a reverse stitch. Okay. Alright. So here is the hem for my facing. 1/4 inch seam allowance, initially sewed with my machine basting stitch. I turned over onto the wrong side, so right now you're looking at the wrong side of the skirt, and then I hemmed it in place with a regular stitch. So you're gonna forgo any pinking on this since we hemmed the edge already. And you're going to do the exact same thing on the other skirt front piece side, and from there we'll move on to the next step. Alright, so I finished hemming the edge of my skirt, as you can see right here. I think I'll give it another little press to flatten it all out. So when you're doing this method, you don't need to do any pinking along the edges here. Now that the 1/4 inch has been folded and hemmed, it will hold off on any fraying on the fabric. So now that I have given that just a little bit press, I'm now going to take my front skirt edge and I'm going to fold it inside. And I'm going to use the little snips that I created previously when I traced and cut out this pattern to assist in folding the side here properly. So once I do that, I'm going to get a pin and pin the top and the bottom first in place. Alright, and now I'm just gonna give it another press here while trying to avoid the plastic balls on top of my pins. There we go. Alright, so we're going to do the exact same thing on the other side of the skirt. We're going to fold it along the little snips we made, marking our fold line, pin it in place, and then we're going to give it a good press along the edge. So I've now folded my sides on my skirt and created the facing, so to speak, for the front skirt. And now I'm going to put this through my machine and base stitch the upper edge of my skirt and facing so that it'll stay in place while I construct the waistband. Okay. Alright, just gonna shorten the tail on my base stitch. And here we go. So we're going to do this again with the other folded facing and move on to the next step. Alright, now that we have constructed the skirt, we're now going to focus on the waistband. And according to the instructions, the next step is that we're going to take the unnotched side of our waistband right here. So I repeat, the side with no notches on it, none. We're going to take that and we're going to turn up 5/8 of an inch and then press it with our iron. So help us out, we're going to get our seam gauge, measure it to 5/8 of an inch, and then we're gonna measure 5/8 of an inch, and we're gonna pin that in place. This is just to assist us for the time being. Make sure we get the right amount. So it's about 5/8 of an inch. So we're just going to continue that along just the unnotched side of our waistband. Okay, I now got my 5/8 of an inch folded up, and now I'm going to take my iron and press it down ever so gently. Alright, so now I've pressed my 5/8 inch fold, and now according to the instructions I'm going to use my pinking shears to trim about 1/4 inch off of the raw edge. Alright, I've now trimmed the 5/8 inch fold that I've made on my waistband, as you can see right here. So now we're going to transition back and start the next step on our skirt construction. So now that I've done that, we're going to proceed to step 21, which is for all views of the waistband. These steps here are just for skirts A and C, and we're only making skirt D, so we skip them to step 21 for all views. So with the right sides together, we're going to fold the waistband along our fold line, and then we're going to stitch the ends, and then we're going to trim the seam allowance along those ends. So we're going to find our folds, our fold line, which is right here. And with the right sides together, we're going to fold right along that little snip I had made previously. And we're going to move our tailor tacks out of the way. So at this point, do not be concerned with lining up your edges here. What you're only going to concern yourself with is the fold line. So here I had made my snip marking the fold line. And we're going to pin that in place right here. And we're going to do this along the rest of the waistband. Now we'll remove all these little metal pins. Okay. Removed all the pins, the metal pins. So this is what our waistband is going to look like now. We're only folding about a halfway along the long end of the waistband. So we're going to take this to the machine, and we're only going to sew the ends of the waistband. Alright, so I'm at my machine, and I'm going to proceed to change the settings that I had previously. So I'm going to change the length back to 2.5. The width will stay the same, 0. And I'm going to move my tension up to neutral. So we're now going to sew the ends of this waistband from our perceived marking right here, which is the orange thread, on downward. But of course I don't want to keep this this mark on here, so I'm going to remove it first, and then I'm going to stitch this end in place. Alright, so now that I've pulled out that tack, I'm going to do a regular stitch. trim the rest of this thread. Alright. So now I'm going to do the same thing on the other side of the waistband. Alright, now we're going to go and trim the ends with our pinking shears. There we go. It'll make it easier when we turn the waistband outside in and make our quarters nice and flat. Alright, I've now trimmed the sides of my waistband, and I'm going to now turn it around. Turn it inside out. So as you can see, me trimming the corner inside made it a lot easier to turn and flatten the corners here. So once I do that, I'm going to press everything down. Alright, I now pressed everything in place. And it's time to move on to the next step.